Chapter 9. The Pig, the Bullocks, the Sheep, the Pony, and the Nanny Goat. At that moment, George's mother came back from shopping in the village. She drove her car into the yard and got out. She was carrying a bottle of milk in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other. The first thing she saw was the gigantic brown hen towering over little George. She dropped the milk. Then Grandma started shouting at her from the rooftop, and when she looked up and saw Grandma's head sticking through the tiles, she dropped the bag of groceries.
"Ha! How about that then, eh, Mary?"
Grandma shouted.
"I'll bet you never seen a hen as big as that. Ha! That's George's giant hen, that is."
But, stammered George's mother.
"It's George's magic medicine,"
Grandma shouted.
"We've both of us had it, the hen and I."
"But how in the world did you get up on the roof?" cried the mother.
"I didn't," cackled the old woman. "My feet are still standing on the floor in the living room."
This was too much for George's mother to understand. She just goggled and gaped. She looked as though she was going to faint. A second later, George's father appeared. His name was Mr Cranky. Mr Cranky was a small man with bandy legs and a huge head. He was a kind father to George, but he was not an easy person to live with, because even the smallest things got him all worked up and excited. The hen standing in the yard was not a small thing. And when Mr Cranky saw it, he started jumping about as though he'd got something was burning his feet. "Great heavens!" he cried, waving his arms. "What's that? What's happened? Where did it come from? It's a giant hen! Who did it?" "I did," George said.
"Ha! Look at me!" Grandma shouted from the rooftop. "Never mind the hen. What about me?"
Mr Cranky looked up and saw Grandma. "Shut up, Grandma," he said. It didn't seem to surprise him that the old girl was sticking up through the roof. It was the hen that excited him. He'd never seen anything like it. But then, who had? "It's fantastic!" Mr Cranky shouted, dancing round and round. "It's colossal! It's gigantic! It's tremendous! It's a miracle! How did you do it, George?" George started telling his father about the magic medicine. While he was doing this, the big brown hen sat down in the middle of the yard and went, "Buck, buck, 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 buck." Everyone stared at it. When it stood up again, there was a brown egg lying there. The egg was the size of a football. "That egg would make scrambled eggs for 20 people, Mr Cranky said. "George," said Mr Cranky, "how much of this medicine have you got?" "Lots," said George. "There's a big saucepan full in the kitchen, and the bottle's nearly full. Here." "Come with me," Mr Cranky yelled, grabbing George by the arm. "Bring the medicine. For years and years I've been trying to breed bigger and bigger animals. Bigger and bigger bulls for beef, bigger pigs for pork, bigger sheep for mutton." They went to the pigsty first. George gave a spoonful of the medicine to the pig. Well, the pig blew smoke from its nose and jumped all over the place. Then it grew and grew, and in the end it looked like this. And then like this. Then they went out to the sheep and out to the cows. They went to the herd of fine black bullocks that Mr Cranky were trying to fatten up to go to market. George gave each one of them some medicine, and this is what's happened. Then the sheep. He gave some to his little grey pony, Jack Frost. And finally, just for fun, he gave some to Alma the nanny goat. Alma grew and grew. See George down there? Chapter 10. A crane for Grandma. Grandma, from high up on the rooftop, could see everything that was going on, and she didn't like what she saw at all. She wanted to be the centre of attention, and nobody was taking the slightest notice of her. George and Mr Cranky were running around and getting excited about the enormous animals. Mrs Cranky was washing up the kitchen, and Grandma was all alone on the rooftop.
"Hey, you!" she yelled. "George, get me a cup of tea this minute, you idle little beast."
"Don't listen to the old goat," Mr Cranky said. "She's stuck where she is, and it's a good thing too." "But we can't leave her up there, Dad," George said. "What if it rains?"
"George!" Grandma yelled. "Oh, you horrible little boy! You disgusting little worm! Get me a cup of tea at once, and a slice of currant cake."
"We'll have to get her out, Dad," George said. "She won't give us any peace if we don't." Mrs Cranky came outside, and she agreed with George. "She's my own mother," she said. "She's a pain in the neck," said Mr Cranky. "I don't care," Mrs Cranky said. "I'm not leaving my own mother sticking up through the roof for the rest of her life." So, in the end, Mr Cranky telephoned the crane company and asked them to send their biggest crane out to the house at once. The crane arrived 1 hour later. It was on wheels, and there were 2 men inside it. The crane men climbed up on the roof and put ropes underneath Grandma's arms, and then she was lifted up through the roof. In a way, the medicine had done Grandma good. It had not made her any less grumpy or bad-tempered, but it seemed to have cured all of her aches and pains. And she was suddenly as frisky as a ferret. As soon as the crane had lowered her to the ground, she ran over to George's huge pony, Jack Frost, and jumped onto its back. This ancient old hag, who was now as tall as a house, then galloped around the farm on a gigantic pony, jumping over trees and sheds and shouting, "Out of my way! Clear the decks! Stand back, all you miserable midgets, or I'll trample you to death," and other silly things like that. But because Grandma was now much too tall to get back in the house, she had to sleep that night in the hay barn with all the mice and the rats.